Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Ford, and we're here for the 36th video in the Writer's Quote installment. Here on the channel, there are 36 videos where I sort of go through different writer's quotes and kind of talk about what they mean to me and maybe offer some type of insight on something, or maybe I just ramble like an idiot. Look, we're here today for the 36th quote, which comes to us from Robert Greene's Mastery. But it's not from Robert Greene. It is, if you've read any of the Robert Greene works, you know that a lot of what happens in his books is the culmination of a ton of research. And he grabs insights from different places in history, different places around the world, all sorts of things. And really what you're doing when you read a Robert Greene book, I think that books are really just little bricks of the most extreme amount of thought that someone has done on any particular thing. Whether that is fictional, whether that is non-fictional, research like these types of videos, or these types of books, the Robert Greene books. Robert Greene really tried to figure out everything he could about the idea of mastery, and part of that is grabbing quotes from other people. And here we have on page 10 a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, Keys to Mastery. Now, I have to show this off because it's one of my favorite things here. Just like the Bible, there are red words in here. Keys to Mastery. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. In every work of genius we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. That's what makes them genius, because they do transcend people. They do transcend the work in which they appear. Literature is not about uniqueness. Literature is about sameness. And when we recognize genius, it's that we're recognizing these thoughts that we have had and stowed away. This is what Ralph Waldo Emerson is saying. I'm going to read it one more time. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. This is from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Personally, so a lot of this series, the Writer's Quote series, there's something that I sort of refer to as the irony of the speaker. A lot of the things that I'm presenting, you're getting them from me because they are the quotes that I notice and find useful, while and whereas many of you would see this quote and never think twice about it because you don't maybe talk yourself out of as many ideas as do I. But we all talk ourselves out of some ideas. Where it hurts me the most, I've talked myself out of every novel I've ever written. I've finished a few novels, and I've talked myself out of them. The novels that I haven't finished because I've talked myself out of them. I am very good at looking at my own work and deciding, that's stupid. Personally, I'm pretty good at noticing that glint, that glimmer of something more than me, something less than me, maybe, depending on how you say it, depending on how you want to conceptualize it. There is the universal, and we sprout out from that. So I am pretty good at recognizing something from that universal core in the short stories that I write. But once it gets out to novels, I quit. With the short stories, I understand the process well enough to know that at some point, everything that's going on is going to make sense, and the parts that don't make sense, I can then revise. But it's that little weirdness in there that's going to make it worth writing. That little weirdness is what is me. But above all that, I think, when taking this quote into account, each time that we have that glinted thought that we will inevitably write off, and that's what we're talking about here, just the ones that we write off, right? Each time we have that glinted thought that we will write off, that will then be recognized when we read American Psycho, when we read The Old Man and the Sea, when we read Lolita, when we read any of these majestic classics, The Great Gatsby. I don't know anyone that appears in The Great Gatsby, but I know all of those character types, right? I don't know any of those people on that level of the world, but I know those people. I don't know any of those rich folk in my life, but I know those people because those people happen in every socioeconomic stratosphere. Every time that idea from the universal appears to us, if you were to sit down and write, if I were to give you, right, the plot of The Old Man and the Sea and say, hey, write this and I'll give you $1 million. You'd write it. You'd write The Old Man and the Sea. I'd give you the title. I'd give you the plot points. It wouldn't be Hemingway's. It wouldn't be the book that Hemingway wrote. If I gave, and I don't mean, you're not Ernest Hemingway. I mean that the book that would come out of your body, out of your mind, and through your fingertips would not be the book that Ernest Hemingway presented. Every time we have one of these ideas that is across the universal, it does not present itself to us in the same way that it presents itself to anyone else, nor will it escape us in that fashion. Every time that we have one of these ideas that lays across the bow of the universal, we're going to pick it up in a different way than anyone else would pick it up. That's why it's worth putting down. That's why it's worth writing. That's why it's worth finishing that project. Because whatever it is that is escaping you is going to be different than it would be escaping me, than it would be escaping Ernest Hemingway, than it would be escaping Emily Dickinson, any of them, anyone. No matter how universal the idea, no matter what literature there is underneath the words that are coming out, the way that they present themselves to you and the way that they escape your means of communication is going to be very, very different than anyone else. So, if we were to lock you in a room with Ernest Hemingway and with Emily Dickinson and with Langston Hughes and throw out the same ideas, look, it's like, pretend you've all seen, surely, some form of, what do they call it? Improv comedy. Do you think anyone really spits out that many different ideas from time to time for the improv comedians? No. It's all the same stuff. But you give each actor, each improv artist, one idea is going to be presented differently by that actor with the other actors with which he or she is acting, and in front of the audience, and in front of the audience on what day, right? All of these different things will conspire to percolate some different experience than what it would be on any different moment. So every time that we talk ourselves out of these ideas, of these stories, of this execution, every time we do that, all we're doing is making the universal suffer. We're not refusing to add something to the universal. We're ripping something out from the universal because I've done this. There's a lot of things that I keep in the back of my mind. Story ideas, poetry ideas, things like that. And I'll write them from time to time. But I'll forget that I had written that poem before. And then I'll find, upon some flurry of editing, oh, this poem and that poem are the same thing. But then I open them up and I read them, and they're not the same thing. It's the same symbol. It's the same idea for the poem. It's the same plot of the poem. The meaning of the poem is different. The whole thing is different. Everything about it is different. But I wrote it at 2 different times. The me's behind them were different. So we're not just talking ourselves out of, we're not just removing something from the universal by not finishing a story. We're doing that thing every time we don't finish a story. So what we have here from Ralph Waldo Emerson via Robert Greene in Mastery is, I'll read it one more time. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. That is all I have for this, the 36th writer's quote here in this playlist. I hope to have you back next time for another writer's quote.